Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And today we have Cherie Priest with us, who's going to be discussing her first mystery novel. She's best-selling, well-respected novelist in fantasy, and mainly fantasy more than science fiction, right? I mean, you've done a lot of kind of genre bending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are rules for genres?
Absolutely. We agree completely. And Cherie's been here a couple times in person, and she has signed a bunch of cool book plates. And so I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase one. And she has agreed to sign more if we run out. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
And Barbara is standing by at home. And I'm going to be monitoring the comments in the chat field. So if you have questions for Cherie, just put them in and I will reemerge towards the end of the hour and be happy to ask any of the questions you might have. So Barbara, we have this well-oiled routine going now.
You really do. I mean, there's a sort of sci-fi fantasy aspect to Patrick's appearance, guesting in and out when we do this, but he's wonderful on doing the tech and always has great questions of his own. So since you mentioned this is her first actual traditional mystery written as a solo, but she is the author of 24 books and novellas, probably more, including the horror novel The Toll, the gothic Maplecroft, and the Clockwork Century series beginning with Bone Shaker. Cherie's been nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula Awards and won the Locust Award for Best Horror Novel. She lives in Seattle. And here's the tantalizing part of this introduction that her publisher sent to me. She has a number of exceedingly photogenic pets. So if we're lucky, we'll get to see at least one.
Oh, I will take off my laptop and I will chase them around the house if we have to. I am not above it. I have done it before. I said earlier, well, I told you guys before this started, the dogs are going to get a walk in a little while, but there's plenty of time for them to wander in and make nuisances of themselves. The trouble is they're both black and fluffy and large, and the lighting in here is not very good. So mostly what you'll see is a lot of wagging black blurs. And one of them is a husky mix with really, really light blue eyes. They're like white blue. So you can always see this like pair of eyes, this big black ball of fluff.
Gotcha.
Well,
I could introduce our 8-pound each puppies, but I think that it's better to leave them aside, although they probably should make a guest appearance.
Oh, yeah, throw them in here. I'm like, right. Oh no, not puppies, anything.
Not puppies. So why don't you show your fabulous poster? Because I'm so envious we didn't get one.
Ooh.
Look at that. Awesome.
Yeah, it came in the mail or via FedEx the other day, and I was surprised and delighted. And I'm going to have to do something with it. I obviously can't travel with it. I'm not going anywhere or doing anything, but thinking about sticking it in my yard.
So we have a couple of ways to go here, but I have to admit, let's talk about Cherie here for a little while, or Cherie, which if you want to be French, we could do, but we're going to stick to Cherie. There was a really fun interview with her recently in one of the book media, and I loved it. So I've taken a few of the questions and I thought we might discuss them. So, kiddo, your favorite book when you were, I have the answers here if you've forgotten your answers, so we're good.
I might have.
What was your favorite book when you were a child?
Oh, I remember my long answer for this, but I don't really know about a short answer. I did all these interviews like a couple months ago.
I know you did. Actually, it is the long answer.
Okay. Well, the longer that answer is when I was a kid, my reading intake was really strictly controlled. My parents divorced when I was small, and my mother was an evangelical, and we did not have anything in our house that was not Christian fiction or literature. And luckily for me, my mother's idea of literature was, is the author dead? Which opened a whole world of exciting. I have a very sneaky father. He was very excited about this. So he started giving me like the big compendiums that would sink a canoe, like the Edgar Allan Poe brick, and then like the Arthur Conan Doyle brick. And then when I was about 13 or 14, he showed up with Lovecraft. And my mother didn't know who that was. And I'm not like I know that he was familiar with it, but I don't know why he picked it. I still kind of think that was an odd choice for a teenager. I'm gonna guess he hadn't maybe read a lot of it. It just kind of seemed to fit the bill. And So my mother's looking at it, and she says something like, well, I don't know this one. Who is this? And my dad's like, oh, well, Lovecraft was writing things back in like the 1920s, like Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald. And my mom is just kind of like, oh, well, they weren't writing bad things in the 1920s, so that's probably fine. And that was it. We were off to the races. My dad likes to take a lot of credit for my career, which honestly I think is fair.
It does seem fair. Obviously,
he let me read the fun books.
Yeah, well, your mom wasn't widely read, but at least she encouraged you to read. So that's a
really
good thing.
No, even her and the family, even they're all big readers. They're all preachers and teachers, and most of them have, advanced degrees. My grandfather was a well-known minister in the Adventist church for decades, and my mother was a principal at small Christian schools for most of her career. So reading was encouraged. It was just really the intake was very particular. I mean, like the first time they ever really ran into conflict was only, I don't know, not long after they got divorced. And I was living in Southeast Texas, where I kind of largely grew up for a long time. And I remember he took me to the library. I just realized there's something on my desk here. He took me to the library, and he knew I liked mysteries. He'd figured that out. So he checked out a couple Nancy Drew books for me, thinking, well, this is pretty harmless, and age appropriate. I would have been maybe 7 or 8, if that. And my mother saw them, and she threw them away. And she made me pay the library back out of my allowance, because I should have known better than to invite the presence of Satan into her home. And I'd like to go, just kidding, but no, that's a thing that happened. And honestly, it was pretty common. So most of my reading was kind of old school. I read a lot of Victorians. Like the older the book was, the safer she felt it was, which was, whatever. But I read, I read, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, his entire compendium, and F. Marion Crawford and Algernon Blackwood and all of these guys by the time I was 13, 14, 15 years old, because she wanted me to read. She just didn't want me to read bad modern things. And so, yeah, that's kind of the longer version. Is that roughly what I said in the interview? Because that's kind of my go-to. Like, yeah, no, that's how that was.
Well, I can certainly see that a book that changed your life, which you identified as Bram Stoker's Dracula, would fit into this.
No, I didn't get to read that, though, until I was in college. Because she knew who Stoker was, and that was absolutely not. She also knew who Mary Shelley was, and she didn't want me to have Frankenstein, which honestly was okay. I realize I sound like a Philistine here, but I never really plugged into. I love the story, but I never really plugged into the book. But Dracula, I read, actually I was right out of college by the time I finally read it, because it was in my first apartment. And it just blew the doors off of, oh my God, this is the other good stuff that I missed all this time. And I had nightmares for weeks, like the good, cool kind that you wake up going, oh man, that was really neat. But it wasn't about like wild vampire stuff. It wasn't, wolves howling and monsters. It was all of the stuff with Jonathan Harker in the castle with the Count, and everyone playing along very, very carefully, because the moment he admits that he knows he's trapped, it's over. And the tension of that was something so intense and palpable for me that, God, it blew me away. Like, I knew Dracula was famous. I knew Dracula was important, but until I got my hands on it for myself, I didn't really it's not that I didn't understand, it's just I did not feel. And it really just kind of became my guiding star for horror going forward.
Well, you'll be interested to know that the actual answer that you gave in the
totally
interview that I have is different. And it relates, in fact, to the book we're going to talk about, because your answer to favorite book when you were a child was anything with a mystery element. I discovered and hoarded Encyclopedia Brown stories and anything Nancy Drew. And currently, you say, I have Chuck Wendig's new one queued up, the Book of Accidents, which is phenomenal so far. And Chuck is a much admired author from Patrick King, our science fiction selector here at the Poison Pen.
He's absolutely wonderful.
He's an interesting author.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get an arc of that, an advanced reader copy. And the truth is, I have not had a great deal of leisure reading time. It's been a year. And so I had the arc of that, and I had Delilah Dawson's Violence, and I had Lord, I feel terrible. I have Colin Dickey's The Unidentified, which actually came out like 6 months ago, and I still have the arc sitting on my thing, and I'm only like halfway through it. But they're all great, and I intend to finish every one of them. But when I get a minute, and right now, like, I meant to log into this a couple extra minutes early, but I got off the phone with another roofing guy. We had a tree fall on our property, by which I mean garage, yard, house, and we've got a few $1,000s worth of damage and cleanup ahead of us. And it's just, this all happened Sunday, so at the start of book release week. I have water poured into my office. It's just been an absolute. It's been a mess of a time, but I'm slowly getting back into reading.
Excellent. Well, you have had terrible weather, that whole river kind of thing. Your top 4 authors, I'm going to answer this because it'll be easier.
Yeah.
In no particular order. You list Cherie Pratchett, especially the witch novels.
Love them.
Dashiell Hammett, especially the Continental Op stories, which is relevant to what we're about to talk about. Barbara Hambly. Now, there's an author I have really liked, and you say her Gothics are your comfort reading. And then Caitlin Kiernan, all of her novels, but all of
their novels, they're
and her short stories.
Fluid, yeah. Caitlin is one of the only short story people I've really kept up with long term. It's kind of never really been my jam, but their stuff is really, really tight. And I also Barbara Michaels, her and Barbara Hambly both I discovered around the same time. And my aunt was a huge Victoria Holt fan, and she's the one who kind of got me into the Gothic through the side door. And Barbara Hambly I discovered through her IP tie-ins. She wrote a lot of like Star Trek books, tie-ins for that kind of thing. She did. I remember the Beauty and the Beast TV show had a couple of tie-in novels that went with it, and she wrote those. And the thing is, again, I was like a teenager, but like a young teenager, like 13, 14, 15 years old. So if I couldn't sneak them home from the library, I'd sit in the Walden books for the B. Dalton in the mall and just read them while my mom was shopping. But God, I loved those things.
So for those of you who don't know, Barbara Michaels, whom Cherie has mentioned, is actually Elizabeth Peters under one of her real name is Barbara Mertz, but she wrote supernatural kinds of books, ghost stories primarily, as Barbara Michaels, often linked to history, which I truly love. But most of mystery fans really know her for the Amelia Peabody series, which she wrote as Elizabeth Peters.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I didn't know anything about those. I didn't even know they were the same person until I was in my 30s. Just somehow it had gone right past me. And I worked at a huge used bookstore for a number of years. Like, I felt completely stupid when I realized, oh my God, of course they're the same person. It's amazing.
Well, I hope you got to read the Amelia Peabody series because they are just pure joy.
I have like half a dozen of them queued up.
And you have to read them. You have to read them in the order she wrote them, or it won't work out as well. Now, all of this has been a long prelude to a review that I read today, which kind of blew me away. Now, we've talked about Cherie. She's written, as you can see, all kinds of stuff, sci-fi, mashup, horror, all Gothics, all kinds of great stuff. So here's how this review starts. The author, who has published across genres, including steampunk, horror, and sci-fi, has now actually written a cozy. And I am just flabbergasted with, I really enjoyed Grave Reservations, but to me, to call it an energetic, cozy mystery just flew me. I'm thinking that, it's kind of a marketing thing in the sense that I have been told, although I don't agree with it, that cozies require a female protagonist, an amateur sleuth who has some kind of generally special knowledge or particular skill. She could be a pet sitter, she could be a baker, she could be a knitter, whatever.
Cooking and knitting are two big ones.
So, but in this book, what we actually have is a travel agent who has some psychic ability, but she doesn't fully trust it, and it really distresses her. And that's how the book starts. And so why don't you tell us about your protagonist here?
Well, her name is Lita Foley, and she is a millennial who's had a difficult time for the last few years. Her fiance was murdered, and the case was never solved, and she's kind of been a little bit adrift since then. She's in her mid-30s. And she decides she's going to start a travel agency, and one of her first clients is a cop on the Seattle PD who's at a conference in Orlando about forensic, stuff. And she changes his flight at the last minute. And he's very peeved about this until he runs up to the gate, kind of hoping maybe he can squeak back into his original flight. And he watches it blow up on the tarmac. And then he feels pretty good about having had his flight changed, actually. But he gets back to Seattle. He does some thinking. He's had some unusual experiences himself. And he looks her up, and they, have some conversations. And he's got this old case that he hasn't been able to solve. It's been driving him crazy. And he's willing to kind of look into just about anything that can point him in the right direction. So basically, they team up and fight crime. And it turns out that the murder case that he, has just been baffled by for several years is connected to the one where her fiance died. And so between the pair of them, gradually these two cases start to come together. And there you go. But yeah, she's a lot of fun to write. And I know that several of the reviews have called her flaky, and I do think that's fair. She's a little bit flaky. But one of the things I talked with the editor about, and one of the things I tried to bake into the manuscript was, yeah, she's a little flaky, but she's not stupid, and she's very, very competent. She's actually really good at what she does. And what she does is she pays attention. And she has started doing this thing. She's always had like a little bit of psychic inkling. And I kept comparing it to, there's an old Saturday Night Live skit with Christopher Walken. It came out around the time of the Dead Zone movie. And it was called the Trivial Psychic Skit. And I went ahead and called it the Inconsequential Psychic because that's actually what I thought it was called. I didn't remember it very well. This aired when I was a child. But the idea that he keeps running up to people and going, you, on the way to work in the morning, you're going to spill your coffee in your lap. It's not too late. And it gets really intense with them and wanders off and finds somebody else. But all these little minor things that aren't really going to change anybody's day or life, but he's confident of them. And so she's an inconsequential psychic. She's a trivial psychic. Most of what she does know isn't really very helpful. And she's trying to hone it a little bit. And so she has some friends. She's got this kind of found family going on at a bar on Capitol Hill in Seattle called Castaways. And Castaways is kind of themed around like Vegas mid-century kitsch. And the owner and the bartender and her best friend's boyfriend and all these people work there, and they're an awful lot of fun. And they do clairvoyant karaoke or psychic songstress night, whichever you prefer. And basically she does psychometry, where she'll take an object, she'll hold it, she'll think about it for a minute, kind of get some vibes off of it, and then she'll pick a song. And so hopefully, if she's done a good job, it's a song that's very relevant to the person who handed her the thing. Like, maybe somebody gives her a passport and she thinks about it for a minute, and then she'll sing like Africa by Toto. Like, yes, I went on this trip on safari and that was really great. Just something to kind of connect these people's lives and to try to practice a skill that is very difficult to practice, kind of with the idea that maybe practice will make perfect for her. And it does seem to be helping. I mean, she did keep a cop off a plane that was going to blow up. So,
Well, she did. Well, psychic karaoke, I thought was a lot of fun, get to the song that is reading you. But also, if you're a travel agent, having some psychic ability would be really handy. For example, she didn't let her client get on the plane that blew up, but there are all kinds of minor and major mishaps that can occur to people who travel. I've traveled extensively, and fortunately have been lucky enough to have very few, but I can see that if somebody could prevent you from getting on a ship that would sink, or,
are you saying this because you've read another interview where I explain how I got the idea for the book?
No.
Okay.
All I know
is
the two little pieces that that I wrote. So if you have something you want to add to that, go ahead.
So in real life, what happened was about 10 years ago at this point, I guess. I did an event in Galveston, Texas. And it was in the winter. It was a good event, had a good time. Again, I grew up in Southeast Texas. Like, it's a familiar, friendly place to me. I was excited to do the event, but in the middle of it, this storm comes up to the Gulf of Mexico. And everybody knows it's going to be bad. It's not going to be a hurricane. It's too cold for that. But at the time, I lived in Chattanooga. So I'm going into the Southeast, and the storm is sweeping up, and it's just going to dump snow all over us. And the Southeast is not that different from the Northwest when it comes to handling snow. You just don't get that much of it, so they're just really not prepared for it, and it's always bad. So I leave the event. Everybody's fleeing the event on Sunday, desperate to get back to the airport and get out before, because flights are already starting to get canceled, we're like, oh man. So I'm in the car. They arranged a car for me, which was nice because the airport's in Houston. And depending on the traffic and everything, that's like an hour and a half, 2-hour trek to an airport from this event. So I'm in the car on the way to the airport and I get a text message from someone I don't know. It's like, hello, I'm your travel agent. I hope to catch you before you left the event. I'm really sorry I didn't, but here's the thing. I actually changed your flight. Here's your new confirmation number. Here's your new stuff. It's the same airline. It's the next gate over. It leaves 30 minutes after this one. I had a bad feeling about this flight with the storm coming in and all. And it was a fairly long text, honestly. And I was like, oh, I mean, okay, I guess. I guess that's fine. Thank you. So I get to the airport and I remember it was American Airlines. And I get into the lobby and there are 187 people in a line stretching around the lobby, trying to get to, of course, the American Airlines desk, which is what I need, and their computers are down. I'm like, well, great. So I'm standing in line for a few minutes and I have my phone in my hand and I texted this nice lady back and I was like, hey, listen, I appreciate you trying, but I think I'm probably gonna be spending the night in Houston, and that's fine. I still have family in the area. No big whoop, but thanks. And she just replies with this one line. She goes, use the kiosk.
She said what?
Use the kiosk.
Oh.
And I was like, there's no kiosk. And she goes, yes, there is. And she describes this place kind of around a corner. She's like, go look. So I do. And it's roped off and nobody's there. And before I could respond, she goes, nobody's using it. Because nobody's using it, go try it. Okay. So I do, it works. I get my ticket, everything's fine. I tell everybody else in line because I'm not a jerk. And go past my original gate. Once I get through security, the flight is canceled. Next gate over, new flight, it's delayed by 45 minutes. And if you travel a lot, that's not a good sign. And I'm like, well, so again, before I can even reach out to this woman, she sends me a text. And she's like, you're in Chattanooga, right? How far are you away from Nashville? And I see where she's going. So I'm like, actually, I'm much closer to Hartsfield in Atlanta. I live at the south end of the state, almost on the state line. It's about 90 miles away. If you can get me into Hartsfield, I can just rent a car and drive home. I've done it before. No big deal. No, she's not happy with it. She's like, no, if you do that, you're not going to get home tonight. And I'm going to get you home tonight. You need someone to pick you up. So I call my poor husband and I'm like, hey, I know this is kind of a big ask. It's like a 3-hour round trip under best of circumstances. But could you come pick me up? With the storm coming in and all, my flights are jacked up. So he does. Fine. I get home at 11:58 p.m. We pull up to the house. And the thermostat on the dashboard goes down to 32 degrees and it starts to snow. And I was like, holy shit. Wow. So the next day, because it's late, next day, I sent her a text message. I was like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you. You did, in fact, get me home last night. And I really appreciated that. That was wild. It's almost like you're psychic or something. And her response, I am not making this up, and I showed this text message to everybody I knew. It's like, her response is, oh, ha, it's funny you should say that. That's been my side hustle for a while. I've worked with the Houston Police Department for nearly 20 years, and I have helped them close nearly 24 cases.
Wow.
I was like, you're a psychic travel agent. And she's like, I was like, you understand that I'm going to steal that. And she's like, oh yeah, God bless, have fun. And obviously it's a very different character. It's not set in the Southwest or in Texas or anything. And the character is younger, et cetera, et cetera. But just the idea of a psychic travel agent and how weirdly useful that would be, So that's kind of where the whole thing came from, sort of.
Well, Well, it's a great origin story, I mean,
Yeah,
and being a writer, naturally you stole it. I mean,
of course.
that's what writers do is it's all grist to the writer's mill, grab it
Mhm.
and run with it. But it's definitely a lot of fun. So I was going to ask you about psychic karaoke, but now we know about that. So tell me about digital scaffolding. What is all that about?
Oh, the companies in there. That's actually
Yeah.
funny. We had to. I didn't realize the extent to which people were going to kind of like get hung up on those. Because the thing is, out in Seattle specifically, I was actually talking about this a couple nights ago with a local bookstore group with their hostess, who's an old friend of mine, who's also local. Like companies like Digital Scaffolding and the other ones that are mentioned in the book, they're very common here. And it's not that unusual for people to work at one for like a year at a time and then move on to a next one. They open, they close. They basically, I mean, in a nutshell, what they do is they sharecrop writers and tech people as they're helping big companies interface with companies like Amazon and Microsoft. And so you'll have writers or advertising people or marketing people or whatever who will spend a year or two at these little companies kind of managing stuff that if they were just doing it directly, they'd get 5 or 10 times the money, quite frankly. And I say this as someone who has both worked for one of those companies and done my own freelancing here. It's much more profitable if you can get on somebody's list and get the work directly. But before you know people and before you have that in, you often work for companies like Digital Scaffolding, where your job is to basically process products for the internet, to create pages for them for Amazon listings or for Microsoft listings or for, and you'd be surprised, a lot of really big legacy companies were established so far before the internet that even now they have trouble interfacing with these big companies. And my husband actually is a marketing manager for a different kind of company that interfaces with a really big companies, and that's what he does out here. But this was yeah, it's just one of those things where like it always surprises me when people ask about it. And my editor also was like, I don't understand. How does this work? And we ended up having a conversation and track changes about it. And I streamlined that down pretty significantly. And it's one of those things where it's like, I realize this is complicated. I have focused on this too much, I think. I don't mean to like take people down a rabbit hole of how tech work in Seattle goes. But since so many people in the story work with companies like that, I needed to explain it at least once or twice,
It's really interesting. I mean, we built the Poison Pen and it's gone from inside out. It never would have occurred to me that, for one thing, I never wanted to hook it up with a big company because, I mean, that was never our mission.
Well, think about it this way. Say you're a big beverage company. I don't want to use like Coke or Pepsi, but you could use them. But a really big beverage company from back in the day, and you want to sell like your sodas, your specialty sodas or whatever on Amazon.com, but you don't have someone who knows how to deal with the vendor end of their system. So you hire companies like Digital Scaffolding, and you say, here, I have this many products that we want to list through Amazon. Say, again, just for example, can you build us pages? Can you write the text? Can you process the pictures and upload them and do all that for all of these products? And companies like that, oh yes, we can take care of that. And they usually have like a graphic designer to deal with the imaging, and there's usually some copywriters and usually some editors and that kind of thing. Between them, you build the pages for each of these products. And so you're kind of a go-between. And yeah, it's one of those things where when you've been here for a while, it's really obvious, but I didn't realize until I was writing it that this is not like normal work-life situations in an awful lot of places. So I realized it gets a little more explanation than maybe I.
No, I think it's fascinating. Actually, one of the things I've been looking at are books that take us out of the kind of normal, older, convention sort of thing. And introduce us to a digital world and a world that, I mean, for somebody my age, is really not one I'm familiar with. So it's good for me, to read about digital scaffolding or digital, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I don't remember the name. I mean, I
we talked to Rachel Housel Hall last night, and she was putting together like digital scrapbooks or some such thing as part of her, and I don't think that way, I mean, I'm strictly analog. So, if it were me, I'd be pasting photos into a book or something of the sort. And I think it's great that one of the things I love about crime fiction is that, and I was talking about this not long ago with a different writer, it's always cut along the edge of social change because it depends on conflict. I mean, crimes arise, thrillers are powered and so forth by conflict. And so when you have change going on, there's always that, conflict at the interfaces, right? And so, you learn a lot over, I've been reading crime fiction for over 70 years now, and it's astonishing how much that I have learned about stuff I'll probably never use, most of it.
I know what you mean.
I have a complete ragbag sort of memory, which of course is beginning to I've overloaded my retrieval system. This is how I look at how to deal with memory when you get to be 80. And my answer is that my memory's fine, but the retrieval system is so overloaded, I can hear it whirring. What I'm trying
the
to
card catalog is still on paper.
Well, and we have a great system because Patrick is paying attention, and whenever I just can't remember a name or can't remember a title or whatever it is, he uses the chat function and it pops up, and that was just great. And then I don't look as flaky.
No, I have a husband who's like my outboard brain, but I have often joked that my card catalog is still on 3x5. It just takes me a second to go picking through them there. But
that's what I think that's what your brain does. The older you get and the more stuff that you've got in there, the fast, it has more stuff to go through. And so, and the reason I know I haven't lost it is eventually on my own, I'll remember it, so it didn't disappear. It didn't flush out of my system. I just couldn't access that particular thing fast enough.
No, I know exactly what you mean. In fact, I got my start actually tech writing right out of grad school when I was in my early 20s. So we're talking 20 odd years ago at this point. But I worked for the company that handled all the online warehousing for Sears.com. And it was my job to port the entire Sears Craftsman catalog to the internet every year. I learned more about power tools. I learned more about, just the way sets come and in what size and what style and what kind of batteries. And I was like I established some of the now industry standard guidelines for how measurements and so forth are handled when it comes to tools on the internet. Today, I had to sit down and read a manual to figure out how to work a tiny electric chainsaw with a battery. And I was like, man, I used to know how to do this stuff off the top of my head. This is, crap. I'm just going to read this and make sure I don't screw anything up. But like I said, we had the tree come down and we're still cleaning debris out of the yard. And some of it was just stuff. And hey, a girl needs a chainsaw. Quite
right. Well, I mean, we have a family history with, if you drop back 100 years, over 100 years, the Sears and Roebuck catalog was basically, and their system was the Amazon of its day. My husband's great grandfather, Julius Rosenwald, was in fact Sears and Roebuck. And, so I'm familiar with how it worked. And I love seeing it. I'm sad Sears closed its last store in Illinois not too long ago. And that was a really sad moment. But for whatever reason, and this is true with a lot of companies, it was true with Kodak, and some can't adapt to changing technology.
They came close, actually. In fact, back in the 90s, they had done these kiosks that were touch screens to help you kind of winnow down the hardline products, we call them, like the big electronics and the tools and whatnot. And so when the internet starts kind of achieving escape velocity from just a handful of people using it and becomes this global thing, they were really poised. They could have been Amazon. The Sears Wish Book could have gone to the internet. And
absolutely.
They could have been Amazon, and Lord knows we tried to help them. But I actually still worked for this company when the Kmart merger happened. And we all knew, like we all kind of knew, we're like, oh boy, here we go. And I left, I guess a year or two after that. And I remember at the time thinking it won't be long. I mean,
they unfortunately invested the wrong way. But they did,
They
as you
thought
say,
it made
they
sense
had
at
the
the
product
time.
stuff, they had the delivery system, and it
Yeah.
could have been different.
They were the lords of mail order. Yeah, they were the lords of mail order. There's no reason they shouldn't have been able to pivot ahead of everybody else. They had all the structure in place. And it still kind of kills me because it was honestly a great job, and I loved the people I worked with. It was a little tiny outfit in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at the foot of Signal Mountain on a golf course. I am not making that up. It was a golf course, and we worked out of the pro shop. The golf course had been closed. I know this is crazy. It was the late 90s. What do you want? But it was a golf course that had been closed down because the guy who owned it had sold off like the front 9 for development, knowing apparently that there were endangered species on the property and kind of hiding it. So when the state came down on him, they made him preserve the back 9 and the building as was. So he just leased out the pro shop for office space, and that's where our office was. It was this rickety, like 70-year-old, like rickety wood building, and the power was always a little sketchy. And when you walked by the Coke machine, if you had any electronics on you, you'd get a zap. And I mean, the building was a huge fire hazard, and I kind of miss it even into this day. And when you were taking your breaks, you could go out along the trails and everything, and it was honestly lovely. It was basically a nature preserve at that point, and all the trails were still there. And we had a king snake that used to pretend he was a stick on the putting green. Like if you thought you saw him, he'd freeze. You can't see me. And it's like, man, you're on a putting green and you're 6 feet long and black. We see you. But I still have like a million pictures from when I worked there. Copperheads and vultures and eagles and hawks and turtles. Oh my God, the turtles. The real water hazard. There was an alligator snapping turtle the size of a manhole cover. She had to have been 50 years old if she was a day. And she lived in one of the ponds and by the culvert. And every now and again, you'd see her hauling herself across the green to the next pond. And it was like looking through a lens at a dinosaur. And it's a big, beautiful thing. I got a bunch of pictures of her once. She didn't seem especially afraid of me, but she didn't want to be my friend. You got to stay out of the range. Their necks are longer than you think they are, and they can take off your fingers. But I would lie down on the course with my phone.
You can certainly see why you write a mashup of.
It's been a weird life.
Well, I was going to say you could draw on your own life for material. I love your travel agent stories. So Lita Foley, Lita actually, is known as the Swan. Is a devoted friend, a struggling travel agent, and an inconsistent psychic. And she calls her business, her travel business, Foley's Flights of Fancy, which I love. And so what we know is Cherie has already told us that she hooks up with the Seattle PD when she changes the flight of a detective called Grady Merritt, and saves his life because the plane blows up. And he's
we don't actually say that anybody died. In fact, it looks like probably everybody was okay.
Okay. But the flight didn't go.
No, the flight didn't go. I want to say it turned up later that like a very small handful of people were badly injured or killed or something. Like they hadn't gone anywhere. The plane just blew up. It was still right there. Right. I didn't want it to open with like some catastrophic tragedy. Like,
well, that's probably why they call it a cozy, right?
Right. It's like here's a lighthearted romp that starts with 300 people dying on a plane.
True. Okay. So not everybody dies, but the plane blows up.
But the plane blows up.
Seattle cop is impressed. Now,
he's glad
if you have somebody with psychic abilities, then you would obviously need them if you were having trouble working a case, and therefore the case is probably not one that's happening immediately, at least not this time.
It's several years old.
But it's a cold case. And cold cases, I think, are really catnip to people who want to write crime novels because you get to dig back into the past. You've got secrets to uncover, and you've got relationships that are all tangled up.
Puzzles to solve,
Yeah, no, it's great. So my question is, having done this, are you planning to write another book for Lita? Is this the start of a series?
Yeah, well, there's at least one more coming. We're hedging our bets a little, knock on wood and all that. The working title of the sequel is Flight Risk, because we're going with travel puns, and it's what we're doing now. And a Great Reservations, the original title actually of the book was Far-Fetched. just kind of after the travel agency. But they decided they wanted to change it, I guess, a few months before things started really getting into production, because, you know, with a hyphen in it, some bookstores and their systems, it can mess with how things are sorted and searched for. So they didn't want something with a hyphen in it. I'm like, all right, well, not a big deal. So we started playing with travel puns, basically, and me and my agent and my editor spent like a week or two just like firing ideas back and forth at each other in a group email. And I don't know, I was sitting outside on the back deck. It was a nice day, and I was noodling with some paper and, like, you know, keywords. You know, what are the kinds of things that we're doing here? Just kind of word clouding it. And the phrase grave reservations popped to mind, and I was like, oh my God, it's perfect. It's punny. It is punny, you know, and it's a little light, and it kind of covers all the bases, and I felt really good about it, and everybody got behind it. I was so relieved. And yeah, I just felt really great about that, because I don't have those moments that often. I really struggle with titles. There's only one other time in my life that I can point to that it actually happened. That just, oh, well, that's the answer, obviously. When I was working on Fort Freak, which was actually the first mystery I ever wrote, but it was part of the Wild Cards franchise, George R.R. Martin. I wrote the interstitial for one of his back in, well, God, it would have been 2009 or 10, but it came out in 2011. And that was the first one I'd ever done. But, you know, I had this guy holding my hand for it. And, you know, so I had a lot of help. And then I did another couple for him. And he kind of took the training wheels off on the last one. And it was honestly extremely complex and tricky. But at the end of it, because he knew I loved mysteries and I'd read a million, but I hadn't really written too many of them. He you know, as part of the editorial notes, he's like, now you know how to write a mystery, go out and write one yourself. And so kind of that collided with the timing of, well, I would like to do something, maybe the world's dark enough right now. Maybe just something lighter and friendlier for my own sanity. and maybe it's time for a little bit of warm entertainment. And at the time I had been watching a lot of TV. God, we had just come off of a cross-country move, our second one in a decade. With 4 animals at the time. We had 4. In addition to the 2 large dogs and the enormous semi-feral cat who was a kitten found under the hood of a car, we had an elderly cat who was quite geriatric, and she was on fluids every other day and on 3 different kinds of medication, and just trying to move all of these creatures from Tennessee back to Seattle. And it had just been a real hard time. And I had taken a work for hire gig that went very poorly. And we don't speak of it, and it's not on my resume, and I won't tell you about it. But I will tell you that by the end of it, I was this close to dragging my master's out and just going back to teaching. Because I was like, you know, if this is what's required to stay alive in this industry, maybe I've had a good run. Maybe it's just time to tap out. But I ended up watching a lot of comfort TV, basically. And one of the things I discovered was the TV show Psych. It ran on, I think, USA for 8 seasons, 9 seasons, and then there were a couple of TV movies that went with it. I binged the whole thing in a summer, and I was like, this is perfect. The puzzles are low stakes. Even if they're murders, you don't know anybody and don't care about them. You know, the puzzles are low stakes. You're really there for these characters. They're delightful. They're fun to hang out with. You would like to go out for drinks with these people. And you show up for these interactions and for these humans. And it's like, obviously he's pretending to be psychic, but it doesn't matter. It's a wonderful setup with wonderful characters, and I loved it. And then there was iZombie with Rose McIver, and then there was Lucifer, and a handful of the, okay, granted the stakes on that were sometimes like apocalyptic, or even supernatural, and like something with lower stakes that you can kind of trust not to break your heart. I'm sorry, I'm getting a call and I'm going to refuse it. Sorry. I have the volume off, but I saw that coming through. I'll deal with that later. So I thought, you know, this is important in difficult times. Having this escapist fiction that just distracts us and makes us laugh and makes us feel good for an hour or two. And there's a pattern to these stories, and they're basically just mysteries with really fun characters. Because, like, I love Agatha Christie, but at the end of the day, Poirot is just a puzzle-solving machine with an accent, in my opinion. He's not my favorite of her characters. I love Miss Marple. I think she's much better. And some of those that don't have her most famous ones, too. but man, just I was like, I see the pattern here, and I would like to contribute to this pattern. I would like to write something that fits into the pattern of something friendly with a little meat to it, with relatively low stakes and just delightful people who you would like to spend time with.
Well, I can certainly see as an alternative to George R. R. Martin's.
Well, obviously, I love him to pieces, but the wild card stuff can skew very, very dark.
Yeah.
And the character that I led with when I joined the consortium, as he calls it, was a New York homicide detective who was about to retire. And in New York, they make you do it at 61 or 2, I don't remember now. But he has this one last case that has haunted him all this time. And so you get this framed story for this elaborate case that they solve in modern day that happened in the late 1970s. But it was pretty dark. Yeah. And then I did another interstitial for the Jokertown Shuffle re-release that was also pretty dark. But then I got to do one that was funnier for Mississippi Roll. I had a really good time writing a funny mystery. And I was coming off that around the time the rest of this sort of came together. I was like, man, that was really fun to just write a mystery with a functioning puzzle that works. But also just these people who are kind of funny and a delight to hang around for a novella, you know? So,
well, it's certainly a different kind of world building than you do for epic fantasy and so forth. And, you know, once you kind of got it set up, then it's fun to see where you can take it. My experience is that humorous mysteries don't go very often. They don't go a long time because, you know, eventually you have to keep upping the stakes, or, you know, they begin to turn into caricature or something in order to be funny. So I don't think I would call it humorous so much as I would call it, you know, maybe cozy isn't all that
it's fine.
inapt a word. And those can go on forever, you know.
They can, and I think the point is the readers come to trust them.
Yeah.
Like I trusted that Psych for as long as it ran, and the vast majority of the episodes, and I just keep going to it as an example because I kind of think it's the platonic ideal of the thing that I was shooting for. You never were really worried about any of the main characters. I mean, for season finales, once or twice, someone will get shot, and oh no, are they going to be? Yeah, they're going to be okay, you know. And that's kind of the beauty of it. Like you can go for that ride and have a little. It's like a gentler version of horror, where you're having a little adventure, but you know in the end that not only are you safe, but these people are probably safe too. And you don't have to worry about, like, you know, something out of left field. And I always tell all my readers forever, in everything I've ever done, the animals are always fine. I will never hurt them. Like there's a little dog in Brimstone that I wrote a few years ago, and there's a lot of peril. And I'm like, I need for you to know the dog's fine. The dog lives happily ever after. Won't stay the same for the people, but any horse, any dog, any cat, any bird, they're fine. And my readers have come to trust me with that to some degree, and I appreciate that, and I never intend to violate that, quite frankly. We all have our hangups, and anyway, that's one of mine.
Well, it's a cozy. It's a crucial element for this kind of mystery that no animal is harmed.
No,
you know, while you're writing it.
Yeah, it needs to be safe.
Yeah,
and I don't know. It's been a rough handful of years, I think, nationally, internationally, personally, and a little bit of friendly, warm safety. It's valuable, and it's something that people kind of, you know, yeah. Well, there's a tendency not to take it seriously as a story or seriously as art, but I don't know. I mean, Shakespeare was just writing a bunch of, you know, fart jokes. and throwing in like fake blood and stuff everywhere. You know, like the best stuff tells us a story that we plug into, that we trust on some level. And I think that maybe the zeitgeist of the late 20-teens, early 2020s is that the world is so terrible. Maybe we can just have some art that doesn't hurt us, that doesn't ask us to drag ourselves emotionally through the mud. And don't get me wrong, that stuff can be very healing. It can be very cathartic. I've been part of the horror community for years, and there's some very fine, very lovely people. Honestly, some of the nicest, sweetest, funniest people you know. But but it's a different kind of catharsis. And different people need different things from their art, and that's fine.
I think you're right. And I agree with all that. And let's not forget too, that because it's a mystery, there's a little bit of a puzzle or a challenge to it. So,
a body count.
It's not pure fluff. And I think that's why, why people enjoy reading them. Let's do our magical thing and summon up Patrick in case he has questions or any from the audience before we run out of time here.
All right, let's see here. Our good friend Lee Whiteside chimes in.
Hi, Lee.
He said, I was wondering about the character with the same last name as me.
Whiteside? Oh, no, I can tell you exactly about that. Don't surprise me, somebody asked. So when you have a bunch of secondary characters, I realize this sounds like a minor problem, but it'll surprise you how long it'll hang you up. You need names. You need names, and the names can't sound like everybody else's names. And so what I typically do is I just scroll Facebook and I look at the names of my friends, or I'll look at advertisements that are kind of way off base for me, and I'll just look at who's liked them. And I'll call that up and scroll down and just like, here's a list of names of people I don't know. Just list names. And Whiteside is an excellent name. I didn't have any other W's. It's not super common. It stands out on the page. But it's also not something really weird that nobody knows how to pronounce or say. And I say this as somebody from a Scandinavian background with way too many names I still don't know how to say. But it's not something that's going to confuse anybody reading it. They kind of absorb it and accept it. Ditto for Grady Merritt, actually. Merritt is the last name of a chick I went to high school with. And she was extremely beautiful. And she had this long, perfect blonde hair and these big blue eyes and like the flawless skin. And I'd run into her in the girls' dorm and she'd be washing her face at the sink with her hair just flung over her shoulders. She didn't even need like a bandana. She was that perfect. And her last name was Merritt. And I'm like, man, that's perfect. But it's literally that simple. Just like I need names to go with some of these folks. And I borrow my friends' names all the time. And I'm going to say like 99.9% of the time, it has nothing to do with the character. Nothing reminded me of them. I literally, what I do is I have that, I'll show you, I have a thing right here actually. I have a legal pad on a clipboard, with stuff written on it. And I will usually take a couple pages and just scroll Facebook and just grab names, first names and last names in 2 columns. And then I start drawing lines between them. And Lee got caught up in that is what happened. I realize that's a long roundabout way, but it's like one of those fiddly things you kind of don't think about. And I'm bad at names anyways. God bless my editor. God bless editors in general. But most recently, I had a character change names twice in the sequel to Grave Reservations. He went from a Casey to a Carson to something else, and I never noticed. And I feel extremely stupid about it. And I'd like to pretend that's the first time that's happened. It is not. I've done it before.
That's what editors are for. Copy it. You're supposed to fix stuff.
Love editors. It's like, thank you for catching that. I very much appreciate it.
So have you ever done the global change to a character name? Because I mean, names are very important.
No, and I'll tell you why. I'm very, very careful about that, actually, because of the time I spent working at that company. So one day, this is long enough ago, I'm not going to get sued or anything, I'm pretty sure. We got in a sheet for upload. And what that means is people who wanted to upload their products to Sears, and this was before Amazon and the system was more standardized. Some of the vendors would send us their sheets, usually they were Excel sheets, and they had to fit within these parameters for title, for content links, for this, for that. And we would upload everything like once every 2 weeks. And once in a while, uploads from vendors would bounce and they would ask us why. Why didn't the system accept this file? And so my boss gives me this file and he's like, hey, I don't have time to look at this. Could you just take a glance through this? I know this isn't your area of expertise, but I bet this is something really stupid and I bet you'll figure it out. Okay. What had happened was someone at Electronic Arts at EA, the big video game company, had decided to change, to do a universal find replace for EA to Electronic Arts in a document they were sending to Sears, spelled S-E-A-R-S. 3,000 lines.
Oh
that
my
had been
gosh.
shacked up because they didn't do it case sensitive. And yes, it was a long time ago, but oh, so I am very, very careful about not doing the universal find replace. I will one by one it. I'll spend all afternoon checking every single one because that taught me a really valuable lesson about not doing that.
There's a question here from Julie, and you've discussed this a little bit, but she asks, did Cherie write short crime stories before novels? She said, sorry, I'm new to this.
That's
And
okay.
do you have any tips for starting? I guess she means starting writing.
Like like for a mystery in particular. So I say
She
this is
didn't
someone who, well,
say,
I'll start there because honestly,
yeah,
kind of everything starts here. Um, excuse me. So when it comes to mysteries, I'd read zillions of them, but I was always one of those people who never figured out who did it. I was usually surprised at the end, and I was like, man, if I can't, I got to figure out how to make this work, or I'm never going to be able to tell one of these well. And what I realized it was is you start with what actually happened and who actually did it. You just write out the actual crime. George calls them a dossier. I had to give him a dossier for the murder, the instigating murderers that lead to what happens in Fort Freak. Which I was going to say, I was just calling it was like a murder. Remember the rat hole, because that's where the murders took place. And George was like, we need something snappier. I need a new title for this. And I just, it sprang to mind like Grave Reservations. I was like, the rat race. This guy's retiring from the rat race. And the diner was called the Rat Hole. We'll call it the rat race. So like once in a while, I'll get just a flash, but they do not happen very often. But no, when it came to developing mysteries kind of from then on out, I started with what actually happened, who actually did it and why. And from like, that's the top of your pyramid. And from there you build out, like, here's somebody who looks like they might've done it. And here's why it looks like they might've done it. But here are your red herrings. Here's somebody else who looks like they might've done it, but they didn't do it. But here are your red herrings. Here's who really did do it. Here's why it looks like maybe he didn't. And here are your red herrings. So it's like, for me at least, and here's the thing, there's no one way to do it right. Never give money to anyone who tells you they know the one right way to write a story of any kind. Don't do it. There's no one right way that works universally for everyone.
Have you taught writing before at all? Any classes?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
No, I taught at UT, well, at the Chattanooga campus when I was still working my grad degree. And I didn't know this then, and I wish I had. I was mostly teaching the 5-paragraph essay to people who tuned me out because they were all older than me. I was a grad student. I was like 21, 22. Most of my students were twice that age, literally. I had students old enough to be my parents, and I had zero respect, and honestly didn't deserve much. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was literally just thrown into a classroom and told to teach.
It was a continuing ed kind of thing.
No, I was a TA. I was an adjunct faculty is what I was, because technically I had enough hours to be one and they needed them.
Gotcha.
So I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I tried really hard, and like there's part of me that wouldn't mind taking a run at teaching again now that I'm older and I know a lot more about how this kind of thing works. But at the time I was literally teaching the 5-paragraph essay to like jocks. Oh my God, I had some poor kids in that class. Oh, bless. You see, what happens with public education that is badly underfunded in places. And I had some beautiful, lovely, well-intended students who had been failed so badly for so long. And I was not capable of helping them in the way that they needed. And I was not really qualified for it, but I learned a lot when I did it. And like I said, maybe one of these days I wouldn't mind taking another run at it as like an actual older professional who knows what I'm doing better. But I have done some workshops in academia. Specifically, there's one out of Tennessee called the Meacham Workshop that UT sponsors through UTC, and I've done some stuff for them, and a few school things here and there and college things here and there. But I'm sorry, that was a really long way of answering that. But this is my last one of these this week, and I'm just like so psyched to like talk to anybody who isn't in my house right now. It's like, oh my God, people to talk to. So I'll just like ramble.
maybe a last kind of comment or question for you.
Sure.
There's somebody on YouTube named Crystal, and she has a nice comment. She says, I finished Grave Reservations in one evening and really enjoyed it. It was very different from your other books. And she says, she cites 4 and 20 Blackbirds, Bone Shaker, and others. She says, how was it kind of switching genres, which you've been talking about
Yeah,
the whole time?
it actually, again, it wasn't really that hard. It was, I should say this, it was time for me to try something else. Like I was not in the headspace to do my usual stuff. And I wanted to do something that better fit the things that were comforting to me, the things that I was plugging into at the time. And so it became this. But it's not like, and I do want to be clear, like this is not the only thing I'm doing. I'm actually getting ready to start like just a straight Gothic. I mean, like lady with big hair and a candle running away from a house. That's what I want to do. And I'm really excited about it. I took a writer field trip with my friend Kat Richardson, who's a better known mystery writer than I am by far, and very, very talented. And we've been friends for years. We used to take writer field trips all the time, but we haven't since I've been back in Seattle and there's a pandemic and so forth. But I visited the place where I am setting my next Gothic. But first, I got to finish rewrites on this. And it is shifting gears. It is a gear shift. But I don't know, the frame, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, the framework of genre can be really very helpful. You go, well, okay, what does this book need if I'm going to write like a Gothic? Well, I need a house. I need a spooky location that can be weirdly isolated. I need some creepy characters. I need a romance gone bad. Okay, well, these are the things I need. And these are the ingredients that go into this kind of story. And for a mystery, okay, well, what do I need? For this kind of mystery, I need a murder victim, at least one, maybe more than one. I need some fun investigators, a cop and a lady who has a travel agency and her best friend. And they're basically Lucy and Ethel, and it's fun, but okay. So when the structure is that different, it's still a shift of gears, but it's not quite like a gear grinding thing.
Have you noticed that a lot of your fans, obviously you're very well known in the science fiction fantasy community. Have you had any resistance at all from them jumping over and trying something different?
You're gonna get resistance no matter what you do.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, but for the most part, no. Like once in a great blue moon, I'll get, and I want to be clear, I don't expect any reader of mine to love everything I do. Like no one book is going to be all things to all people. No one story is all things to all people. My parents, or my dad at least, my dad and my stepmom, my mom won't read my books, but my dad and my stepmom have books that they prefer over others. And, they'll even admit, well, that one really wasn't for me. That's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It's totally normal. But I like having the flexibility to go, you know what, I'm going to work on this now. You know what, this is my brain space now. I'm going to work on this instead.
It'd be kind of nice to lead some of your readers into a genre that they weren't familiar with, and they might explore,
Yeah, that's fun too. Yeah. And I always try to point all my friends at them. Like, oh, if you're into this, I know some stuff you're going to like, And I love doing that. It's lots of fun.
That's great.
Well, Cherie, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
Thank you for spending an hour with us. You're coming up.
Sorry, I can't be there in person.
Well, you're coming up on the Halloween weekend when all kinds of wonderful stuff can happen, right? So for those of you who get tired of ghoulies and ghosts and things that go bump in the night, you can try this somewhat inconsistent but striving psychic.
Inconsistent psychic. Yeah,
yep.
they told
she's striving. She's a striver, and you've got to like working on developing it. And so it's a somewhat offbeat police procedural amateur sleuth kind of combination thing, which is really a lot of fun. And let's not forget that real police investigations, especially serial killer ones, have actually used psychics. And missing person cases have been known to use psychics. So it's not all in the realm of fantasy. There's some real
Well, at the end of the book,
real
there's a
world
contract.
stuff that goes on with psychics and cops or other law enforcement investigators. So why not have a good time with it? You're going to love the karaoke.
Everybody's holding the cover, so I'm going to hold the cover.
That's great. So anyway, we do have book plates. So if you would enjoy a copy, we can certainly sell you one, and Cherie will sign more for us if we actually need them.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
have
Anytime.
a wonderful Halloween weekend, everybody. Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much,
joining us.